The desert stretched endlessly, an ocean of sand and jagged rocks under a sun that felt like it was burning through the very bones. Staff Sergeant Eli Mercer led Alpha Team through the narrow ravine, his boots kicking up dust that swirled in the heat like ghostly specters. The morning had started with a false sense of calm, the kind that always precedes chaos. Birds had long ago stopped singing in this war-torn stretch of the Middle East, leaving only the wind whistling over broken terrain. Eli's eyes scanned the horizon relentlessly, trained to catch the smallest movement, the slightest flicker. He had been through firefights most men only saw in nightmares, and yet something about this mission felt different. His gut tightened, not fear exactly, but a sharp, insistent warning. "Team, eyes sharp," he muttered, voice low but carrying. "We move fast, stay tight, watch each other's backs." The men nodded, their faces a mixture of grit, exhaustion, and determination. They trusted Eli with their lives, not just because of his record, but because he never let them down. Not once. The first explosion came without warning. It tore through the ravine like a fist of hell, throwing dirt, rock, and metal in every direction. The ground quaked, and Eli was thrown forward, his helmet hitting a jagged stone. Pain shot up his skull, blinding him for a fraction of a second. He tasted blood and grit. He tried to rise, tried to call out, but the world had been reduced to smoke, chaos, and screaming. When the dust finally settled, the scene was catastrophic. Half of the ravine was crumbled, twisted, and on fire. He could barely see his team. His radio crackled twice, then fell silent. A heavy dread settled in his chest. He tried to move, but his leg buckled. Pain lanced through his thigh and knee. He realized with mounting horror that he couldn't stand. The enemy was everywhere, figures moving at the edge of his vision, armed, organized, methodical. They hadn't missed him. They were hunting. Eli's fingers dug into the sand, dragging him behind a half-collapsed wall. His breath came in short, burning gasps. Every instinct screamed to run, to fight, but he couldn't. Not like this. Meanwhile, in the chaos above, the lieutenant made a decision that would haunt them all. Fall back now." It was the kind of order soldiers are trained to obey, but that no heart ever accepts willingly. Alpha Team hesitated, casting frantic, searching looks toward the smoke where Eli had disappeared. But the terrain was deadly, the enemy relentless, and the men's ammunition running low. One by one they obeyed. They left him. Eli felt their departure. Every retreating step echoed like a hammer in his chest. They were abandoning him. The thought stung more than the blood, more than the pain in his leg. But he knew they had no choice. The ravine had become a death trap. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time was meaningless in the haze of pain and heat. Eli pressed himself into a shallow depression in the sand, trying to stay out of sight. He counted his breaths, felt the pulse in his temple, and forced himself to remain calm. He couldn't let panic take him. Panic would kill him faster than the enemy. Then he heard it, a faint, broken whisper through the static of an open channel. It was barely audible but unmistakable. "Don't leave." His heart lurched, his voice raw and hoarse tried to respond. "I'm here." Nothing but static answered. Eli's mind raced. Had it been a hallucination, a leftover signal from his own radio, or was someone trying to reach him? The thought gave him a spark of hope, fragile but potent. If he could just survive the night, find a way to signal back, maybe they wouldn't have truly abandoned him. He shifted, wincing as pain shot through his leg. Every movement was agony, but he had no choice. He had to find cover. Shards of rock and debris offered the only protection in the open ravine. He crawled, inch by agonizing inch, every movement accompanied by the metallic scrape of his knife against stone. The wind howled through the ravine, carrying with it the distant shouts of enemy forces. Their language was unfamiliar, guttural, sharp, but Eli understood it perfectly. They were hunting. They were closing in. He paused behind a large boulder, listening. The sound of approaching boots, the clatter of weapons, the harsh laughter of men who thought victory was already theirs. Eli's pulse hammered in his ears. He felt the sting of tears that refused to fall. He was trained to fight, not cry. But tonight, alone, betrayed by circumstance, he let the raw edge of fear touch him. Eli's hand brushed something metallic in the sand. His helmet, dented, scorched, but still recognizable. He put it on, the weight oddly comforting. It was a reminder that he was still a soldier, still someone who had been counted out but refused to surrender. A sudden noise, a twig snapping, made him freeze. He heard voices approaching, closer, faster. They were laughing now, cruel, mocking, confident. Eli's training kicked in. He scanned for escape routes. Every option was a potential death sentence, but staying put meant certain capture. He pressed himself lower, forcing himself into the shadows. Somewhere beyond the smoke, he thought he saw movement, an arm, a rifle, a shadow crossing the sand, but the heat waves distorted everything. The enemy was near. His fingers dug into the dirt, a silent vow forming in his mind. He would not be taken. Not like this. Not today, not ever. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, silence fell. The air was heavy, thick with dust and the smell of smoke. The enemy had paused, perhaps assuming he was gone, another casualty, another body for the ravine. Eli allowed himself a single, shallow breath, but he knew better than to relax. The danger wasn't over. He was alone, wounded, and surrounded in a hostile land. Every step forward would be a gamble with death itself. He crawled further, each movement measured, silent, deliberate. Every muscle ached. His vision blurred. The scorching sun had dropped behind the rocks, casting long, eerie shadows that danced like ghosts across the sand. And then faintly, almost impossibly, he heard it again. The whisper through static. "Eli, hold on, we're coming." He froze. Could it be his team, a stray signal from command, or something else entirely? The voice carried hope, desperation, determination all at once. Eli's eyes narrowed. Pain lanced through his body, but his spirit ignited. He wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. He had survived this far, and whatever lay ahead, he would face it. Because deep down, one truth burned brighter than the desert sun. He was not going to die alone. Somewhere under that ruined stretch of battlefield, the sand shifting, rocks trembling and distant voices echoing, Eli Mercer opened his eyes fully. And he realized he wasn't alone. Eli Mercer's body burned with pain that no amount of grit could mask. Blood oozed from a deep gash along his thigh, staining the dusty desert floor a dark, angry red. His leg refused to bend properly, the joint stiff and useless after the explosion that had almost killed him. Every breath rattled in his chest like dry leaves in a storm. Yet, despite the agony, he forced himself to crawl. Inch by tortuous inch, he moved across the open ground, his hands raw from scraping against the rough, jagged stones. The sun had dropped behind the horizon, leaving the desert bathed in a fiery twilight that made every shadow a potential threat. Eli knew the enemy would be combing the ravine soon, hunting for any sign of survivors. They had no mercy, and neither did the mercenaries lurking beyond, soldiers hardened by countless skirmishes in this unforgiving landscape. Every sound was amplified in the silence, the rattle of a distant gun, the sharp bark of a command, the crunch of gravel under a boot. Eli pressed himself against a broken wall, flattened against a shattered slab of concrete, trying to disappear into the shadows. His breathing was ragged. His pulse thudded in his ears so loudly it almost drowned out the enemy's movements. He tugged his half-functioning knife from its sheath. The weapon felt foreign in his trembling hands, a small anchor in a sea of chaos. He tested its edge on a piece of loose concrete. It would have to suffice if the enemy found him. Survival now was a mixture of luck, instinct, and sheer determination. Then he heard them. Boots, fast, precise, moving in formation. Laughter, harsh and metallic, echoed off the rocks. The language was foreign, guttural, and commanding. They were organized, confident, and they were close. Eli's stomach tightened. Adrenaline surged, masking the pain for a fleeting moment. He pressed himself even flatter, whispering under his breath, come on, stay silent." The footsteps paused too close. His heart pounded. A voice barked something sharp in the enemy tongue, followed by a grunt and the scraping of metal. Someone had found the trail, his blood, his scent. Eli's vision blurred as he remembered Alpha Team. They had left him. Everyone had assumed he was gone, dead. But Eli Mercer wasn't ready to die. He tore a strip of cloth from his undershirt, tying it around his leg as a makeshift tourniquet. Pain seared through his body, but the bleeding slowed just enough. He checked his sidearm, jammed from the blast, and cursed under his breath. The radio was fried. His only option was to rely on his body and his wits. Every second felt like a lifetime. The enemy resumed their approach, speaking rapidly, and Eli counted the seconds in his mind, timing the interval between each footstep, each shuffle. He needed to act, but how? Every movement risked discovery. Every breath could be his last. A shadow fell over him. A figure moved along the edge of the concrete debris. Eli froze, knife in hand. His eyes tracked the movement. The figure crouched, scanning the area, weapon ready. It was too dark to make out features, but the silhouette was unmistakable, hostile. Eli held his breath. His body ached with exhaustion, but he forced his muscles to stay still, praying they wouldn't notice him. Suddenly the figure moved closer, closer than Eli could tolerate. Panic clawed at his chest. He weighed his options: attack, hide, or run. Attack meant almost certain death. Running was impossible with his leg. Hide was all he had. He pressed himself lower, burying his body behind a mound of rubble, praying the shadow would pass. Then it stopped. A pause. Eli strained to hear. Nothing, silence. And then a sound he didn't expect. A faint whisper, barely audible over the night wind, coming through the static of a neglected open channel. Eli, hold on, we're coming. He froze. Could it be Alpha Team? Command? Or just a trick of the mind, a hallucination brought on by blood loss and exhaustion? He wanted to believe. He had to. Hope was the only thing keeping him alive. He whispered back, voice hoarse and ragged, I'm here. The silence returned, longer, heavier this time. Eli swallowed bile. He knew the enemy hadn't disappeared, they were just cautious, calculating, waiting. And then suddenly he realized he could hear their movements again, a footstep, a shuffle, a low laugh. They were closing in. He pushed himself across the dirt and rocks, dragging his injured leg behind him. The pain was unbearable. Sweat and blood mixed on his skin, sticky and hot. His vision blurred, but he refused to stop. Survival wasn't just instinct, it was obligation. He couldn't give up. Not after everything he'd been through. Not after the men he had left behind. Not after the people who depended on him. Then he saw movement ahead, shapes between the rocks, armed, scanning. Eli's heart leapt. He was exposed. No cover, no escape, only confrontation. He pressed himself down, hiding in the shadows, praying they wouldn't see him. A sudden clatter, a boot hitting a rock too sharply. One of the enemy soldiers looked directly toward him, eyes sharp, alert. Eli's mind raced. He had to think fast. He couldn't outrun them. He couldn't fight them head-on. His best option was stealth. He waited, breath held, muscles trembling. The soldier moved on, brushing past the edge of the rubble where Eli lay, his boots scraping the sand just inches away. Eli forced his body lower, a whisper of movement. The soldier's back was turned now. Eli had a chance to crawl further, closer to a safer spot, closer to an abandoned shack he'd seen a few 100 feet away. But just as he moved, another figure appeared from the shadows. Eli froze mid-motion. This one was smaller, faster, and carried something unfamiliar in his hands. Eli's pulse thundered. Could it be another American, or just another enemy waiting to end him? He couldn't tell. All he knew was that this moment, right here, could decide whether he survived another hour or became another body lost in the desert. He gritted his teeth, letting every ounce of training kick in. One misstep, one wrong move, and it would be over. And then faintly, just at the edge of his hearing, he heard it again, that whispering voice over the radio channel, stronger this time. "Eli, hold on, we're coming." It was the tether to life, the spark that refused to die. Eli swallowed hard, ignoring the screaming in his leg and the pounding in his chest. He pushed himself forward again, crawling toward the jagged rocks that might hide him, might give him a chance to survive the night. Each movement was agony. Every inch was a battle against the body that wanted to quit, against the enemy that wanted to find him, against the desert that wanted to claim him. And somewhere in the darkness, in that ravine littered with rubble and fire and smoke, Eli Mercer realized the truth. He wasn't just fighting to survive. He was fighting to be found. And whatever came next, he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. From the shadows, something moved toward him, silent, deliberate, unknown. Eli tensed, knife ready. His breath slowed to a controlled rhythm. The footsteps were careful, measured, not the clumsy advance of enemies but the calculated approach of someone trained. And then in the dim moonlight filtering through the ravine, Eli saw it. A fellow American soldier crawling toward him, weapon ready, eyes scanning the darkness. Before Eli could speak, before he could even process what he was seeing, a gunshot erupted outside the ruined shack, then another, then three more in rapid succession. Eli's heart skipped, the shadows deepened, and in the chaos of gunfire and smoke, the soldier whispered urgently, "They're here, and they know exactly where we are." The night had just begun. At Forward Operating Base Haven, Specialist Jenna Hale paced the perimeter like a caged animal, her boots crunching against the gravel. The night was quiet, almost too quiet, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. Her mind, however, was a storm of fear, anger, and determination. Command had declared Eli Mercer presumed KIA hours ago. They had told her clinically, without hesitation, he was gone. He had been left behind in enemy territory. She wasn't allowed to go after him. Jenna didn't accept it. Her chest burned as she thought back to Kabul 6 months earlier when a building had collapsed around her during a mission. It was Eli who had pulled her from the rubble, ignoring his own safety, dragging her through smoke, fire, and falling debris. She owed him her life. Not just life, but everything she had learned about courage, about loyalty, about refusing to quit. She stopped packing and slammed her fist against the metal wall of the command tent. Dust rose, falling like snow onto her gloves. Her voice, when she spoke, was sharp, desperate. "He's alive, I heard him. That wasn't a malfunction, that wasn't interference, that was Eli." The lieutenant, a tall man with a permanent crease between his eyebrows, looked at her with a mixture of pity and frustration. "Specialist Hale, we've gone over this. The area is blacklisted, too many hostiles, recovery is impossible." Jenna's eyes blazed. "Impossible is just a word you use when you've given up. I know he's alive, and I'm going after him whether you like it or not." Her words cut through the quiet like gunfire. A few nearby soldiers glanced up from their radios and laptops, eyes wide. Some admired her courage, some thought she was insane. Command did not like insubordination, and in this case it could mean the end of her career, or worse. The Co shook his head. "You are authorized to sit tight, Specialist. You'll follow orders, that's how this works. You go out there alone, you'll die. End of discussion." Jenna's jaw clenched. She had no intention of listening. She had one plan forming in her mind. Get a vehicle, get supplies, go alone if she had to. She wasn't about to watch Eli Mercer die. She stormed out of the tent, ignoring the Co's protests. Her boots kicked up dust as she headed toward the motor pool. She had memorized every supply truck, every route, every escape path around the base. If she had to go rogue, she could. And she would. Jenna's hands flew over the gear, pulling together what she could carry: ammo, water, medical kits, grenades, and a pistol. Her eyes scanned the vehicles, calculating which one could survive off-road, which could hold enough supplies, which could take her deep into enemy territory. She settled on a Humvee, rugged, fast, capable of handling rough terrain. As she climbed inside, securing the supplies and checking the weapons, a shadow moved at the edge of the lot. She froze, eyes narrowing. A figure emerged silently, almost deliberately. It was Corporal Ray Torres, the sniper she had worked alongside for months. Quiet, reserved, deadly accurate. No one knew much about him. He rarely spoke, never volunteered for extra duties, and had a past that seemed to haunt him in the quietest moments. "You're really going?" he asked, voice low, almost a growl. "Yes," Jenna replied, tightening her gloves. "He's alive, Ray, I can feel it, and I'm not leaving him." Ray studied her for a long moment. He didn't argue. He didn't question. He simply nodded once and climbed in beside her, securing his rifle across his lap. "You're insane," he muttered, more to himself than to her. She didn't answer. Words weren't necessary. Actions were. And right now they had only one mission: find Eli Mercer alive at any cost. The Humvee roared to life, tires kicking up gravel and dust, and Jenna eased it out of the base. She stayed off the main roads, using narrow tracks she had memorized. The desert night swallowed them, but Jenna's eyes were sharp, every shadow, every movement, every sound analyzed. Hours passed. The temperature dropped rapidly once the sun disappeared completely. The desert became a world of contrasts, pitch black in some places, illuminated by moonlight reflecting off sand and rocks in others. Every rock formation, every ridge, every gully could hide a threat or provide a lifeline. They stopped at a ridge to scout the area. Jenna pulled out her binoculars, scanning the ground below. The ravine where Eli had last been seen stretched out like a scar across the desert. Fires burned in the distance, tiny pinpricks of orange light against the black night. She knew the enemy would be on high alert, searching every corner, every rock, every shadow. Ray leaned back, his rifle resting on his knees. "They're tracking something," he said quietly. "3 vehicles back. I can't tell if it's the same ones, but they're moving fast. They're not ours." Jenna's pulse quickened. "Then we don't have much time." Ray nodded. He was the kind of soldier who rarely spoke, but when he did, every word carried weight. She trusted his instincts as much as her own. The Humvee crept along, hugging the shadows, avoiding open spaces. Jenna's hands ached on the wheel, her muscles tense, every nerve alert. She didn't allow herself to think about what might happen if they were caught. There was no room for fear, not tonight. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed across the desert. Rocks ricocheted nearby. Ray's eyes snapped toward the sound. Movement, fast, coming straight toward us. Jenna slammed the vehicle to a stop behind a boulder. The engine idled, muffled, as they waited. The desert fell silent again, only the wind whispering across the dunes. Then something crashed violently against the back of the Humvee. The vehicle rocked. Jenna yanked the door open, gun raised. Ray was already moving, rifle trained, scanning the darkness. Out of the shadows emerged a figure, low to the ground, moving with intent. Both Americans froze, tension coiling like a spring. "Who's there? Show yourself," Jenna demanded, voice sharp as a whip. The figure halted. For a moment, nothing. And then slowly a hand emerged from the darkness, palm outstretched, a gesture of truce. Jenna's finger twitched on the trigger. Ray's rifle followed every motion. The figure spoke haltingly in English. I'm not your enemy. I can help." Jenna's eyes narrowed. Why should I believe that? The figure didn't answer immediately. He glanced behind him at the desert, the ridges, the shadows that could conceal 1,000 dangers. Finally, he said, "Because the men chasing you, they're not your people. And if you follow me, you can save someone who's still alive." Jenna's heart skipped. Alive? Ray's eyes met hers, silent communication passing between them. They were both thinking the same thing. It had to be Eli. The figure crouched lower, keeping his hands visible. I know where he is, but we don't have time, they're coming fast. Jenna's decision was instantaneous. She didn't hesitate. She fired the Humvee forward, tires crunching over the sand, following the stranger into the unknown. Every muscle in her body screamed tension. Every nerve was on fire. She had no map, no backup, only her instincts, and the unshakable belief that Eli Mercer was out there, waiting. The desert swallowed them, darkness pressing in from every side, and Jenna Hale realized something terrifying and exhilarating. She had crossed the line. She had disobeyed orders, risked everything, and thrown herself into the jaws of danger for one man. And somehow, somewhere in the desert, Eli Mercer was alive. But the question that haunted her mind, and the shadowy figure leading them forward, lingered. Would they reach him before it was too late, or were they walking straight into a trap deep inside enemy territory? The desert air was suffocating and still. The moon cast silver shadows across the rocky landscape, turning jagged outcroppings into ominous shapes. Every sound was amplified: the scrape of a boot against stone, the clatter of a loose rock, the whisper of wind across the dunes. Staff Sergeant Eli Mercer pressed his body flat against the floor of an abandoned storage shack, his vision flickering in the half-light. Blood matted his hair, and the wound along his leg throbbed with every heartbeat. His chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven breaths. He had survived the explosion, crawled through the ravine, and evaded enemy patrols. But he was not safe. Not yet. Not by a long shot. He pressed his back against a cracked wall and surveyed his surroundings. Broken crates, scattered sandbags, and the detritus of abandoned lives offered little protection. He listened. Every creak, every whisper of movement, every tiny sound could be the difference between life and death. And then he heard them. Footsteps, fast, precise, deliberate, not random, not chaotic, trained. They were closing in. Eli gritted his teeth, forcing himself to remain calm despite the pain and fatigue threatening to overwhelm him. He dug his fingers into the dirt, ready to crawl again if he had to. He glanced at his weapon, a knife crude and chipped. His sidearm had jammed during the blast. His only option was to rely on stealth, cunning, and pure instinct. Every nerve screamed danger. Every instinct screamed fight. But he couldn't fight head-on. Not in this condition. Not against a unit that outnumbered him 3-1. A shadow appeared at the edge of the shack. Eli froze. His hand tightened around the knife, muscles taut. Then out of the darkness, a rifle barrel appeared. Eli tensed, ready for the final confrontation. But the figure didn't shoot. Not immediately. Instead, he crouched, breathing slowly, carefully scanning the area. The man's uniform was foreign, but there was something familiar, something that made Eli's pulse jump. A hand extended, slowly, carefully. Eli's mind raced. Could it be a trap? Was this another enemy trying to lure him into the open? Or could it be someone who, like him, had been left behind? The man's voice, low and steady, broke the silence. Eli Mercer. Eli's eyes narrowed. Who the hell are you? Name, Parker Hayes. I'm American, on a recon team. Didn't expect to see anyone else out here. Relief and skepticism collided in Eli's chest. Another American, another survivor, but the danger hadn't ended, not by a long shot. Before Eli could speak again, the sharp crack of gunfire tore through the night. Bullets slammed into the shack, splintering wood and sending dust and debris raining down on them. Eli reacted instinctively, grabbing Parker and pulling him low. "They found us," he hissed, his voice tight. Outside, the night erupted in chaos. Shadows moved with deadly precision. Eli could hear orders barked in harsh, guttural tones. They were outnumbered, surrounded, and trapped. Parker's hands shook as he tried to steady his rifle. We have to move," he stammered. "They're going to breach." Eli nodded, swallowing the bile rising in his throat. Every inch of him screamed to run, but his leg was a useless weight dragging him down. Crawling was agony. Standing was impossible. He gritted his teeth, forcing his body to obey, ignoring the screams of pain. A grenade rolled under the door of the shack, sending dust and sand into their faces. Eli lunged, grabbing it and hurling it back toward the attackers. The explosion rocked the ground, shaking the shack to its foundations. Silence followed, too perfect, too heavy. Eli realized with a jolt that they were not safe yet, not even close. Parker looked at him, eyes wide. "There's something you need to know." Eli froze, his body ached, every muscle screaming in protest. "What is it?" he demanded. "I wasn't sent here to rescue you," Parker admitted, voice trembling. "I was sent here because of what you're carrying." Eli frowned, confusion mixed with fear. "Carrying? I don't understand." Parker hesitated, glancing toward the shadows beyond the shack. "It's in your vest, left pocket." Eli's hand moved instinctively. Bloodied fingers brushed the fabric. He unzipped the pocket and pulled out a small, metallic object, a data drive, military issue, sealed and encrypted. He stared at it, disbelief and horror flooding his senses. He didn't remember taking it. What is this?" he whispered. Parker's expression was grave. "It's classified beyond top secret. You were marked, planted on you during the explosion. They want it back. The enemy knows its value. That's why they ambushed your team. That's why they left you for dead." Eli's stomach turned. The mission, the explosion, the abandonment, it had all been part of a trap, and he had walked straight into it, oblivious. The sound of footsteps outside made them both freeze. Shadows moved against the walls, flitting across the sandbags. The enemy had regrouped, adapting to their tactics, closing in from multiple angles. Eli's mind raced. How could he survive this? How could they get out alive? His leg throbbed, every movement agonizing, but surrender was not an option. Not with Parker depending on him, not with the drive in his possession, and certainly not with Alpha Team out there, still searching, still hopping. The door of the shack shuddered as a boot slammed against it. Eli raised his knife, muscles coiled, ready for combat. The wood cracked again, splintering under repeated force. The enemy would break through any second. Then just as suddenly a shadow flickered at the window. A figure appeared, another enemy scout, but he froze mid-step, staring at the shattered door. Something about them seemed different, hesitant. Eli's pulse surged. Could they hesitate? Could there be a weakness here? Before Eli could process, Parker whispered urgently, "We have to move now. There's a path through the rocks, few patrols. If we go quickly, we might make it." Eli looked down at the data drive, its weight both literal and symbolic in his hand. This was no longer just survival. This was a mission, one that could change everything. Every second counted. Every decision was life or death. He nodded to Parker, "Let's go." They moved carefully, silently, across the floor of the shack. Each step was measured, calculated, every movement designed to avoid detection. The night outside was thick with shadows, the wind carrying the scent of gunpowder and fear. And then, just as they reached the broken doorway, a flash of movement, figures emerging from the darkness, circling, closing the net. Eli froze, every muscle tensed. Parker's rifle was ready, hands shaking. Eli whispered, more to himself than to Parker, "They're hunting us." Parker nodded, eyes wide. "And this time we're the prey." The desert night exploded into action. Gunfire, shadows, and the scream of the wind became one. Eli Mercer, bleeding, exhausted, cornered, realized the full weight of what awaited him. And yet somewhere in the darkness, a sliver of hope glimmered, a way out, if they could only reach it in time. The night had just begun. The desert night was a predator, and Jenna Hale was running straight into its jaws. The Humvee bounced violently over uneven terrain, every jolt shaking the supplies, rattling her nerves, reminding her that one wrong move could be fatal. Beside her, Corporal Ray Torres sat like a statue, rifle across his lap, eyes scanning the blackness ahead, calculating every possibility. The moon hung low, casting silver shadows across jagged rocks, ancient desert ridges, and the occasional twisted remains of war machinery. Every shadow could conceal an ambush, every ridge a sniper's perch. But Jenna didn't hesitate, not once. Her mind replayed the scene at Forward Operating Base Haven, the Co's dismissal, the declaration that Eli Mercer was presumed KIA, the way command had turned their backs. Anger burned hotter than fear. She had crossed the line already. Every moral, every regulation, every rule had been broken the moment she climbed into that vehicle. "Whoever's out there is tracking us," Ray finally said, voice low, calm but dangerous. "3 vehicles back. I can't tell if it's the same ones, but they're moving fast. They're not ours." Jenna's jaw tightened. She had expected pursuit, but hearing it confirmed sent a surge of adrenaline straight through her veins. They weren't just chasing her, they were hunting. And she had no reinforcements, no backup, nothing but her wits, determination, and Ray. She killed the headlights. The Humvee was swallowed by darkness, the desert horizon fading into shadows. She guided it off the road, into a narrow canyon flanked by rock walls that seemed to pinch the sky into a thin ribbon. The walls would offer concealment, but not for long, if the enemy had thermal scopes or night vision. Jenna's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden movement in her peripheral vision. Her hand went instinctively to her pistol. Ray's rifle was up in a heartbeat, the scope trained on the shadowed rocks. "Movement fast, coming straight toward us," he whispered. The Humvee swerved to avoid a rocky outcropping. Dust exploded into the air and Jenna's heart thudded against her ribs. She glanced at Ray. His jaw was set, eyes locked forward. Neither spoke. Words were unnecessary. Then something slammed violently against the back of the Humvee. The vehicle jolted. Jenna cursed under her breath, slamming her foot on the brake. Dust and gravel sprayed, clattering across the canyon floor. Ray leaned forward, pressing himself against the dashboard, rifle raised. "They're close, too close." Jenna's mind raced. Who was attacking them? Were these enemy combatants tracking Eli? Or worse, were they mercenaries sent specifically to retrieve the data drive that Eli had somehow acquired? She killed the engine and crouched low behind the wheel. Heart hammering, she peeked out at the darkness. A shadow detached itself from the canyon wall, moving toward them slowly, cautiously, hands raised. Jenna's finger hovered on the trigger. "Identify yourself," she demanded, voice firm but controlled. The figure stopped, still out of reach of the headlights. A pause, tense and heavy. Then, in halting English, he said, I'm not your enemy. I can help." Ray's eyes narrowed. He leaned back slightly, keeping the rifle trained. "Why should we believe you?" The man crouched lower, careful to appear non-threatening. "Because the men chasing you, they are not your people. If you follow me, you can save someone who's alive." Jenna's stomach tightened. Alive, Eli Mercer. The words hit her like a fist. She didn't have the luxury of doubt. Every second counted. Every choice could be fatal. Ray glanced at her, silent communication passing between them. They both understood the stakes. This was the only chance to reach Eli alive. "Move," Jenna commanded, throwing the Humvee forward. Tires spun over loose gravel, kicking up dust in clouds that mingled with moonlight. The mysterious figure led them, weaving through narrow canyons and hidden ridges. Every second was a gamble, every shadow a threat. The desert seemed alive, whispering threats and promises in the wind. Rocks jutted up like jagged teeth, ready to crush the unwary. Dust stung their eyes, and the Humvee groaned under the strain of overdriven suspension. Behind them, the sound of engines grew louder. The hunters were relentless, their headlights piercing the darkness at irregular intervals. Every flicker of light reminded Jenna that failure meant death, not just hers, but Eli as well. Jenna's fingers ached on the wheel. Every muscle in her body screamed with tension. Every heartbeat drummed with the same rhythm. Survive, reach him, save him. "Faster," she muttered. "We can't stop, not now." Ray's hand rested lightly on the gear shift, keeping the vehicle balanced. His eyes never wavered from the terrain ahead, calculating jumps, dips, and obstacles with uncanny precision. He was quiet, methodical, a calm presence amidst chaos. Suddenly the ground ahead dropped sharply into a narrow canyon floor. The Humvee dipped, nearly losing control. Jenna swore, gripping the wheel tightly, steering with every ounce of strength she had. The vehicle landed hard, tires spinning in loose sand. Dust and pebbles sprayed high, some striking the Humvee's sides with sharp clacks. The figure ahead waved them forward, disappearing into a maze of rocks and ridges. Jenna followed without hesitation, trusting the stranger entirely. They crested a ridge and paused briefly. In the moonlight, she saw the faint outline of a ruined building in the distance. Could it be the shack? Could it be Eli? Her pulse raced. She didn't allow herself to imagine the alternative. "Keep moving," the figure urged. "We're almost there, but they know we're coming fast." Jenna glanced at Ray. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes betrayed the tension. They both understood the truth. They were walking into a battlefield with no backup, relying on a stranger in enemy territory. Every step could be fatal. Jenna gritted her teeth, gripping the wheel tighter. She had crossed the line already, disobeyed orders, risked her career, and thrown herself into the desert night for one man. There was no turning back. The shadow of the canyon stretched long and menacing before them. The silence was heavy, broken only by the whisper of the wind and the faint hum of the Humvee's engine. Jenna's heart thundered, every muscle was tense, every nerve alert. And then just at the edge of the ridge, something moved. Not the shadow of the guiding figure, not the shifting rocks, but another presence. Low, deliberate, moving with intent. Jenna's grip tightened on the wheel, fingers pale. Ray raised his rifle instinctively. The figure stepped into the moonlight. For a fraction of a second, she thought she saw Eli Mercer's face. But no, this was someone else. Someone she did not recognize. And yet, in their stance, in the deliberate caution, there was an unmistakable signal. They were not immediately hostile. Jenna's mind raced. Could this be an ally, or was it a trap waiting to spring, waiting to end them all? She forced herself to take a steadying breath, reminding herself why she was here, why she had crossed every rule, every boundary, every command. To find Eli Mercer, alive. The figure raised a hand slowly. "Follow me," he said, voice low, controlled. "They're expecting you to panic, move carefully, and you survive." Jenna glanced at Ray. He nodded, silent, ready. Together, they followed Humvee, crawling after the stranger into the darkness. The desert seemed endless. The shadows deepened. Every heartbeat carried the weight of possibility, danger, and hope. Jenna Hale realized as she pressed forward into the unknown that she had crossed a line she could never return from. Orders, protocols, even loyalty to command were meaningless now. There was only one thing that mattered: rescue, survival, and reaching Eli before it was too late. But in the silence between the rocks, a single terrifying thought echoed in her mind. They were being watched. And the hunters were closing in faster than she could imagine. The shack sat like a corpse in the middle of the ravine, its walls scorched and splintered from explosions, windows gaping like empty eyes. Inside, Eli Mercer crouched with Parker Hayes, breathing shallow, every muscle screaming with pain. The data drive pressed against his chest was heavier than any weapon, its value measured in lives, secrets, and deadly consequences. Outside, the wind whispered through the broken roof, carrying the faint, chilling sound of distant footsteps. Eli's eyes flicked across the interior, calculating, planning, improvising. Every second mattered. Every heartbeat could be the last. Parker's hands shook as he reloaded the rifle. Eli gritted his teeth. He couldn't afford panic, not now, not with the enemy closing in. "Listen," Eli whispered, voice low but commanding. "We can't hold them forever. We have to create a path. I need you to cover me while I move to that wall. We can collapse it, buy ourselves time." Parker swallowed hard. You want me to? Eli's glare was sharp, unyielding. Yes, cover me, or we both die here. Parker nodded reluctantly, rifle aimed at the shattered doorway. He fired when the first shadow appeared, bullets ricocheting against the wooden frame. The enemy hesitated, scanning, unsure. Their numbers were overwhelming, but Eli's strategy wasn't about winning. They just needed a chance to escape. Eli pressed his body low and limped toward the wall. Pain lanced through his leg with every movement. He ignored it. Survival demanded focus, not fear. Every inch closer to the weak point in the wall was a gamble, but one he had to take. The first grenade landed just beyond the doorway, shaking the shack violently. Dust and splinters filled the air. Eli coughed, grit and blood choking him, but he forced himself forward. Parker's voice broke through the chaos. Eli, they're coming through. Eli froze, listening. The enemy was methodical, relentless. He could hear the rhythm of their steps, the clatter of weapons, the low murmur of commands. They had him trapped, but he refused to surrender. He reached the wall. Fingers digging into the splintered wood, he tested its weakness. It would collapse if he leveraged the momentum of his weight, and if the timing was right, it could create just enough distraction to make a break for it. Parker fired again, every shot deliberate, buying Eli fractions of a second. The air was thick with tension, dust, gunpowder, and fear. Eli planted his foot, bracing his shoulder, and slammed against the wall with every ounce of strength he had left. Wood cracked, dust exploded, and the wall shuddered under the impact. A hole appeared, enough to crawl through. Eli glanced at Parker. Now, he shouted. They moved together, low to the ground, crawling through the debris. Outside, the enemy hesitated, regrouping. But the chaos had given Eli and Parker a small advantage, a narrow, dangerous path through the jagged rocks toward the canyon beyond. Eli's legs screamed in protest, but he forced each movement. Every step was agony, every breath sharp and burning. Yet survival demanded it. Every second spent hesitating meant death. Then a sound froze him, a distant engine roar. Eli's eyes darted toward the ridge. Headlights pierced the darkness. Reinforcements, or another trap, he couldn't tell. Every instinct screamed danger. Move, Parker urged, dragging Eli behind a boulder. The enemy was regrouping, aware now of their escape. Shadows flickered, moving closer, tightening the noose. Eli swallowed bile, forced himself to stand, using Parker as support. His leg protested violently, but he forced it to move. Step by step, they limped through the canyon, dodging shadows, every rock and ridge a potential shield. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the canyon, sharp and unmistakable. Eli Mercer, step out, you don't have to do this. Eli froze. Recognition shot through him. It was Jenna Hale. Jenna, he gasped, disbelief and relief mingling. How did you? No time, she shouted, pointing to the Humvee hidden behind a ridge. Get in now. Eli's heart surged. Hope, raw and immediate, coursed through his veins. Parker nodded, understanding the gravity, and they sprinted toward the vehicle. Every step was agony, every sound potentially fatal. Behind them, shadows emerged, enemy soldiers closing in, fast, methodical, ruthless. The canyon became a gauntlet, each movement a test of speed, instinct, and courage. Jenna floored the accelerator, tires spinning over loose gravel, dust exploding into the night. Eli and Parker dove into the back, clutching weapons, hearts pounding, breaths ragged. The first shots rang out, bullets pinging off the Humvee's frame. Ray returned fire from the passenger seat, precise, deliberate. Shadows twisted in the moonlight, some falling under the sudden counterattack, others disappearing into the rocks. The Humvee roared forward, bouncing violently over jagged terrain. Every jolt sent pain shooting through Eli's body, but he gritted his teeth, holding on, refusing to cry out. Survival demanded endurance, not complaint. Ahead, the canyon opened into a wider stretch of desert. Jenna swerved the vehicle, keeping the Humvee hidden as much as possible behind dunes and rocks. Behind them, the enemy faltered momentarily, confused by the sudden counterattack. Eli allowed himself a brief glimmer of hope. They had survived. Against all odds, they were still alive, but the night was far from over. From the rearview mirror, Eli glimpsed figures regrouping. They were persistent, relentless, and well-trained. The canyon had provided temporary safety, but the open desert beyond was vulnerable, exposed. He turned to Parker. "We can't stop, not until we're clear, understand?" Parker nodded, eyes wide with a mixture of fear and determination. "I understand." Jenna's grip on the wheel was white-knuckled. "We'll make it," she said, more to convince herself than anyone else. "Just keep low, keep quiet, and follow my lead." The Humvee surged forward, bouncing over sand and rock, engines roaring, shadows twisting and spinning around them. The enemy fired sporadically, but the combination of speed, terrain, and precise counterattacks kept them alive. And then in the distance, Eli saw it, the faint glow of a hidden path, narrow and treacherous, but offering the only chance of escape. "Left," he shouted, pointing. "Take the path, that's our way out." Jenna swerved sharply, tires skidding over loose gravel. The Humvee tilted dangerously, but she held it steady, guiding them through the narrow route. Rocks scraped the sides, dust exploded into the air, and every second brought them closer to freedom, or death. Behind them, the enemy regrouped, voices shouting, boots pounding. But the Humvee was already slipping through the narrow path, disappearing into the shadows. Eli sank back, every muscle screaming, sweat and blood coating him. Parker leaned against him, equally exhausted. And for the first time since the explosion, Eli allowed himself to hope. But the desert night had not finished with them. A distant metallic click echoed across the canyon, a sound Eli recognized immediately. Mines, tripwires. They had been prepared for this, and their path was far from secure. Eli's eyes darted to the ground, scanning every inch, calculating every movement. The data drive pressed against his chest, heavier than ever. They were alive, but the night was still deadly, and the enemy was relentless. And somewhere in the darkness, another shadow moved silently, observing, waiting. The stand in the shack had ended. The battle wasn't over, not by a long shot. The desert stretched out like an endless void, black and unforgiving under the faint silver glow of the moon. Jenna Hale's hands were raw from gripping the Humvee wheel so tightly. Every jolt, every rock, every dip in the sand reminded her that one mistake could end everything. Behind them, the enemy regrouped. Their vehicles, like predators circling wounded prey, were gaining ground despite the Humvee's speed. Bullets spat through the air, striking rocks and sand, pinging against the metal frame of the vehicle. Dust and debris filled the air, stinging eyes and coating lungs with gritty heat. Eli Mercer pressed his bleeding leg against the floor, forcing each movement, ignoring the agony. Parker Hayes sat beside him, pale, trembling, clutching the rifle as though his life depended on it, which it did. Eli could feel the weight of the data drive in his vest pocket, the invisible chains of responsibility pulling him forward. It wasn't just survival anymore. Every heartbeat, every breath carried consequences far beyond themselves. Ahead, the desert opened up into a narrow canyon, flanked on either side by jagged cliffs. It was a choke point, dangerous, yes, but also their best shot at escape. If they could cross it quickly, they could lose the pursuers in the maze of rocks beyond. But it was a gamble. One wrong turn, one miscalculation, and the enemy would have them trapped. Jenna adjusted the wheel, eyes scanning for the faintest signs of tripwires, mines, or ambush points. Her jaw was tight, muscles coiled like springs. Ray Torres, sitting in the passenger seat, scanned the dark horizon, rifle raised, scope trained for movement. He had barely spoken since they left forward operating Base Haven, but his silence was concentration, a deadly calm that reassured Jenna in a way words never could. "Watch the left side," Ray warned, voice low, almost a whisper. "Rocks are loose. Could be a sniper nest or traps. Keep it tight." Jenna nodded, tightening her grip. The Humvee bounced violently over a sharp rise, throwing them momentarily into the air before landing harshly in the sand. Eli gritted his teeth, suppressing a scream as pain shot through his leg. Parker groaned quietly beside him, trying to hold onto the rifle without losing it to the jolts. The enemy fired again, bullets striking the Humvee in rapid succession. Sparks flew, metal screamed, and the smell of scorched paint mixed with the desert's dry heat. Jenna didn't flinch. She drove with deadly precision, skimming between rocks, hugging shadows, and keeping the Humvee low and fast. Suddenly, the desert floor shifted beneath them with a metallic click. Eli's pulse spiked. He froze, recognizing the sound instantly. Mines, tripwires. They had been set up for anyone pursuing or escaping. "Hold on," Eli shouted, voice hoarse with exertion. "Step lightly, avoid the center, look for shadows." Jenna adjusted immediately, skimming the edges of the canyon floor. The vehicle tilted dangerously, tires scraping against jagged rocks, sand spraying in all directions. Ray leaned out slightly, scanning, shouting directions over the roar of the engine. "Left, left there, smooth." They threaded the line of mines and wires with precision born of desperation. One misstep, one slip, and everything would be over. Behind them, a flash of light, an explosion. A vehicle had struck one of the mines, throwing sand and debris high into the air. The enemy faltered, but only momentarily. They regrouped quickly, closing the distance, relentless and coordinated. Eli pressed himself further against the Humvee floor. Sweat mixed with blood, stinging his eyes. Every movement was agony, but there was no choice. Parker glanced at him, fear and determination mirrored in his wide eyes. "They're catching up," Parker whispered, voice tight. "They won't catch us," Eli gritted out. "Not if we stay sharp, not if we move as one." Jenna swore under her breath, weaving the Humvee through the canyon. Rocks scraped the sides, and every jolt sent pain lancing through Eli's leg. But they were alive. For now, they were surviving, and survival demanded crossing this deadly line of fire. Ahead, the canyon narrowed even further. It was a gauntlet, a trap designed to crush anyone who dared pass. Shadows flickered along the cliffs, the glint of weapons reflecting in the moonlight. Eli and Parker crouched lower, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. Then came the first shots, sniper fire. A sharp crack rang out, and a boulder exploded near the Humvee, sending dust and pebbles into the air. Jenna swerved violently to avoid the debris, tires skidding over sand, sparks flying. Ray returned fire, methodical, precise, cutting the enemy's lines, creating chaos, buying them precious seconds. Eli gritted his teeth, clutching the data drive, watching the shadows move, calculating every angle, every escape route. One of the enemy vehicles surged forward, attempting to block their path. Jenna slammed the accelerator, ramming the Humvee past the blockade with brutal force. Metal screeched, glass cracked, but the vehicle held. Behind them, the enemy faltered, but not for long. More shadows emerged from the cliffs, moving fast, climbing down into the canyon with terrifying speed. Eli realized they weren't just being chased, they were being trapped. The gauntlet was closing. "Hold together," Eli shouted, pain and determination mingling in his voice. "Focus, every second counts." Jenna maneuvered the Humvee through the narrowing canyon with a skill born of desperation. Ray fired continuously, covering their escape, while Parker ducked low, clutching the rifle and suppressing the tremors of fear. Then, just when it seemed they might break through, a flash of movement, another enemy sniper perched on a cliff above. A bullet pinged off the Humvee, inches from Parker's shoulder. The vehicle jolted violently. "Hold still," Ray shouted, lining up his scope. He fired, and the sniper's figure vanished from the cliff. Silence fell for a heartbeat. Then more shadows appeared, converging from multiple angles, guns raised, traps ahead. Eli's mind raced. They couldn't outrun them forever. They needed a plan, a final move to break through the deadly gauntlet. "Jenna," he barked, "we're going to have to take the path through the rocks. It's tight, but it's our only shot." Jenna didn't hesitate. She angled the Humvee toward the narrowest part of the canyon, tires scraping violently against jagged stone. Dust, sand, and pebbles exploded around them. The vehicle tilted dangerously, but she held it steady. The enemy fired, bullets striking the sides, ricocheting sparks. Eli gritted his teeth, gripping the data drive, while Parker pressed down low, eyes wide, holding his rifle ready. They threaded the narrow path, inch by inch, every movement a life-or-death gamble. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew fainter, then louder again as more enemy soldiers regrouped. Finally, the canyon opened into a wider expanse of desert. Freedom, for the first time in hours, seemed possible, but the night was far from over. The enemy was relentless, cunning, and adaptive. Eli allowed himself a brief breath. They had crossed the line of fire, but only just. The battle was not over, not yet. In the shadows, unseen eyes tracked their escape. And somewhere beyond the horizon, new threats waited, patient and deadly, ready to strike when the moment was right. The line had been crossed. Survival demanded more than courage. It demanded every ounce of skill, instinct, and luck they had left. And in the quiet seconds between chaos, Eli Mercer realized that the true test had only just begun. The desert stretched endlessly, moonlight casting silver shadows over the jagged rocks and dunes. The Humvee roared across the open expanse, tires kicking up clouds of sand and gravel. Inside, Jenna Hale drove like her life, and Eli Mercer's depended on it because it did. Eli, bleeding and exhausted, pressed himself against the Humvee floor, clutching the data drive like a lifeline. Every step, every jolt sent agony through his leg, but he didn't cry out. Survival demanded endurance, not complaint. Parker Hayes, pale and trembling, gripped his rifle with knuckles white as bone. Beside Jenna, Ray Torres scanned the horizon, eyes cold, calculating every threat, every shadow. Behind them, the enemy regrouped. Their vehicles moved with terrifying precision, guns blazing intermittently, searching for any opening. Shadows flickered over the sand, enemies closing the net. The chase had become a war of attrition. One mistake, one miscalculation, and death would claim them all. Jenna's jaw tightened. "They're catching up," she muttered, voice sharp with determination. "We're not going to let them win. Not now, not ever." Eli's chest burned as he lifted his head slightly. "We have to reach the extraction point. Coordinates are in the drive. Once we get there, we can call for air support." Ray shifted, rifle trained, eyes narrowing. Extraction point is still miles away, and the path is crawling with them. Mines, patrols, ambush points, it's a nightmare. Eli nodded grimly. "Then it's a nightmare we survive." The Humvee leapt over a ridge, crashing down the other side. Sand exploded around them, the engine groaning under strain. Jenna swore under her breath, gripping the wheel tighter. Every jolt was a test, every shadow a potential death sentence. Ahead, a narrow gorge appeared, too tight for the enemy vehicles to follow directly. Jenna angled the Humvee, tires scraping the jagged rocks. Sparks flew, but the vehicle held. They were ahead by mere seconds. Then a sharp crack split the air, gunfire. Bullets struck metal, sending vibrations through the Humvee. Shadows on the cliff above moved with deadly precision. Snipers. Ray fired back, methodical, each shot calculated. The Humvee lurched violently as bullets tore into the side. Dust filled the cabin, stinging eyes and choking lungs. Eli forced himself upright slightly, pointing to a small ridge on the left. "Through there. It's risky, but it's our only shot." Jenna swerved sharply, navigating the Humvee along a path barely wider than the vehicle. Rocks scraped along the sides, tearing paint and denting metal, but she held steady. Every movement required absolute precision. The enemy hesitated for a moment, unfamiliar terrain, narrow passage, but then regrouped, firing from both sides of the gorge. Eli ducked as a bullet shattered the rearview mirror. Parker pressed himself flat against the Humvee floor, muttering under his breath, fear palpable but determination driving him forward. Eli pressed his hand over the data drive. It has to survive. If we make it, the information on this drive can change everything. Lives, missions, everything. Don't lose it now. Jenna's eyes flicked to him. I won't, not today. The Humvee bounced violently, skidding over loose gravel, hugging shadows, twisting through the gorge. Behind them, the enemy scrambled, weapons flashing, vehicles skidding over rocks. It was chaos. Survival balanced on a knife's edge. Suddenly, the ground shook violently beneath them, another mine buried and hidden. Eli shouted a warning. Jenna swerved, narrowly avoiding it, the Humvee tilting dangerously to one side. Dust and rock exploded into the air, some striking the roof. Ray fired again, suppressing enemy fire while Parker ducked lower, breathless. Eli's mind raced, calculating every angle, every possibility. They were outnumbered, outgunned, exhausted, and yet not defeated. Ahead, the gorge opened into a small clearing. A helicopter silhouette appeared against the horizon, blades slicing through the night air. Extraction. Salvation. Go, 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 Eli shouted, forcing every ounce of strength into his voice. Jenna pressed the accelerator to the floor. The Humvee roared forward, tires tearing through sand, rocks scraping dangerously close. Bullets ricocheted, pinging off metal, one striking the windshield with a shattering crack. Ray fired continuously, precision shots that took down any enemy daring to approach. Parker, now steadier, fired as well, providing covering fire for the final dash. The helicopter hovered just beyond the clearing, lights piercing the desert darkness. Eli could see the winch rope swinging. It was a lifeline, a thread of hope in a night of chaos. But the enemy wasn't done. A vehicle surged forward, attempting to intercept the Humvee before they reached safety. Jenna swerved violently, narrowly avoiding collision. Sparks flew as metal scraped against jagged rocks. Eli gritted his teeth. Almost there, almost there. The Humvee hit the last stretch of sand leading to the helicopter. Bullets tore through the vehicle's sides, the engine screaming under the strain. Eli felt his heart in his throat. They had seconds that would decide life or death. With a final burst of speed, Jenna surged forward. The Humvee lurched onto the sand, climbing toward the helicopter's landing zone. The enemy fired desperately, but the rotor wash from the helicopter created chaos, throwing sand and dust into their line of sight. Eli threw himself out of the Humvee as it skidded to a halt, Parker following immediately. Bullets whipped past, striking the vehicle, bouncing off rocks, missing them by inches. Ray jumped down last, rifle still ready, scanning the perimeter. The winch rope dropped. Eli grabbed it first, hoisting himself upward with every ounce of strength left in his body. Parker followed. Jenna and Ray jumped next, the helicopter ascending rapidly as enemy fire ricocheted off the sand and rocks below. Inside the helicopter, Eli collapsed against the floor, bloodied, exhausted, every muscle screaming. Parker leaned against him, trembling but alive. Jenna slumped into the seat, white-knuckled, heart hammering. Ray remained alert, eyes scanning the desert below, ensuring no immediate threat followed them. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "You're safe for now, but this isn't over. You'll have to move fast once we land. Enemy forces are still in the area." Eli looked at Jenna, gratitude and relief flooding his eyes. You didn't let them leave me behind. You came for me." Jenna's voice was soft but fierce. "I told you, I don't leave people behind, not anyone, not you." Parker nodded, still catching his breath. "You saved us all. Honestly, I didn't think we'd make it." Ray finally exhaled, shoulders relaxing slightly. "We made it against all odds." The helicopter rose above the desert, carrying them toward relative safety. Below, the enemy forces scattered, too late to stop the extraction. The desert night swallowed their pursuers, leaving the Americans alive, battered, but victorious. Eli pressed the data drive to his chest. This changes everything. We survived, and the mission wasn't for nothing. Jenna nodded, eyes scanning the horizon. We crossed every line tonight, rules, orders, expectations, but we made it, and that's what matters. The wind whipped through the open doors of the helicopter, carrying away dust, pain, and fear. In that moment, amidst exhaustion, blood, and adrenaline, they realized something profound. Courage wasn't about following orders. It wasn't about rules. It was about loyalty, instinct, and refusing to give up, even when the world had written you off. Eli looked at each of them. Jenna, Ray, Parker. We did it together. The helicopter banked toward the safety of the base, cutting through the desert sky. Below, the ravine, the canyon, the path they had fought through disappeared into darkness. And for the first time in hours, Eli Mercer allowed himself to believe. They had survived against all odds. But even as relief washed over them, Eli couldn't shake the lingering truth. The desert was vast, the enemy persistent, and the war was far from over. The night had tested them, pushed them to their limits, and demanded everything. And yet they had crossed the line of fear, pain, and death, and survived. Against all odds,